When was it that you got exposed for the first time to hardware? You said, you mentioned using KUKA and Fanucs robots. These are industrial robots that are used to like pick and place or weld or do all this stuff. And I can imagine how you use that for animation. But when was it you're like, okay, we got to make the jump of quality and go and automate some of the animation? Explain me that.
Yeah, so I watched. I grew up with the original Star Wars, and I remembered that there used to be a lot of documentaries on this. There was a motion control rig that was used to shoot a lot of the principal photography for Star Wars, but specifically the scene where Luke Skywalker is blowing up the Death Star. He's going through the trench, and that was all computer controlled camera work, and that was done on a system. It was actually done in Marin, which is about half an hour from me here. Those were bespoke machines that were $1 million robots, essentially, with cameras on them. And it was about 2008. The economy had crashed in America, and I was shopping on eBay, and I realized you could buy these industrial welding robots for pennies on the dollar, that being like $10,000. But these were systems that should have been $80,000, $90,000. So let's get one. And so I bought one off of eBay, and it showed up on a giant truck, and then we had to kind of figure out if it was useful for anything. But the thesis was, well, why can't I use a welding robot? I've seen these videos of these things. They're incredibly fast. They're incredibly precise. Why don't we put a camera on that and see if we can do the same thing that these guys did 25 years ago?
So what's the experience of being acquired by Google? Like, how does live this? And by the way, I really want to know also the bad sides of it, if you have any, because it's been a while ago.
It's happened very quick. Google was a customer of mine. We would shoot videos for them. And so we were known inside of Google as people that had this kind of crazy technology, these robots. But we're also just doing traditional design work for them and traditional kind of 360 advertising, print, television commercials, and some specialized cinematography, really for the Android phones that were coming out at that point. We did a lot of shooting of them. So they knew us.
And where are you spending most of your time right now? I'm very curious.
Spending most of my time sitting in front of a Zoom station, talking to my remote company. We're all remote, so I spend my entire day sitting, unfortunately, in a chair, staring at a rectangle, speaking to human beings through an artificial interface.
What is your advice for a young founder that it's building something hard? Because it's building in an industry that it's hard to crack. It's building a solution that it's hard to make, and it's building a team that it's hard to put together for the aforementioned two reasons. What's your advice?
I mean, a lot of people give up pretty early, and I think that maybe the message here is like tenacity matters. If that's the way you're wired. And so I heard an anecdote. 10% of venture-backed companies succeed, and an investor told me once, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'll pretend it is, and I've adopted it, and it aligns with my thesis, so I'm sticking with it. But the investor told me, he says, Jeff, the reality is, it's not that 10% of the companies aren't onto something brilliant or don't have product market fit, or there's some existential problem with the company. The majority of companies that fail are because the founder moves on and does something else.
Hey everyone, and welcome to BitBuilders, where we sit down with the greatest minds building and exploring robotics in construction and space. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology, and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
Hi, Jeff. Welcome to BitBuilders.
Hey, great to be here.
Let me do something. What I do usually is I just ask the guest to introduce himself, and then we'll probably unpack everything you say throughout the first part of the podcast. So, you pick your wording, and we'll go on the each toggle.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't introduced myself for a minute, so we'll see where this goes. I'm Jeff Linnell. I'm out of San Francisco. I'm the CEO and founder of Formant, and let's see. Been in arts and technology my whole career, and I started out in New York City doing. Had a design company and an animation company. Did a lot of television broadcast design work. People like MTV and Viacom back in the day. Then ended up doing special effects. Ended up in kind of .com 1.0, building intranet sites and websites when that was a thing. And so all sorts of stuff in New York, and spent a little bit of time in Europe. Somehow ended up here in San Francisco a very, very long time ago, and got more involved in technology. Had a company called Bot and Dolly that became known for very technical photography and cinematography. So we ended up kind of evolving into a company that used large industrial robots, things like Fanics and Kukas that are traditionally applied to auto manufacturing. And we put George Clooney's on them and Sandra Bullock's on them, and cameras, lights, and we would film Hollywood movies. So very kind of strange path to get there, but ended up doing things like that. We were then acquired by Google, and I ended up inside of Google running various aspects of the robotics group. Ended up in product and had a broad exposure to the entire robotics portfolio, which at that time was extremely broad. We were acquired about a week after or before, I don't recall, Boston Dynamics. So I saw that whole movie, and obviously I've been following them for a while, but very close to them. And eventually I left and I started Formant, as well as a design agency at that time. And let's see, that was about 6-7 years ago at this point. So still at it. Been working in robotics, I would say 25 years at this point. I am not trained as a roboticist. I'm not trained as an engineer. I went to art school and ended up just kind of always leaning more technical, and here we are. But I think as a result of that, I have kind of a orthogonal point of view on the market. I have a very different view on interfaces for software because I've used them in various industries outside of robotics. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of my story.
I love it. I think I've seen again only one time this like interaction design to robotics bridge, and it was the founder of Arduino that we got on the podcast on the last show. And just like you, that's where you started. I'm very curious. What did how does one go and pre-2000 and get into the industry for special effects, for the kind of like design for cinematography? What's that industry like? We've never talked about that on BitBuilders, so I guess you got to give us a little bit of an intro. What did you do there?
Oh wow, yeah, I don't know. It's so long ago, and I think what I'm kind of astounded by and is just the radical change recently, and that everybody that I have worked with in that part of my career, are sort of, we always thought they would be the last to be replaced by a technology or, the creatives. And and AI has just absolutely, changed the playing field there, and what would take us, months, if not half a year to accomplish, you can do in a day. And so there's been radical transformation there. But, for me, I think, how did I get into it? I went to school, studied art, studied video art, which was a thing, back in the day, and ended up having access to some really sophisticated computers at the university. And so, I kind of dove into 3D animation software. I was pretty fascinated by that, and ended up in New York. I think, oh man, how did this happen? I don't know. One day, I had I ended up at this company called R. Greenberg Associates, RGA. They were sort of the industrial light and magic of the East Coast, and ended up working on TV commercials right out of school. That job lasted for about a year, and I think I had a certain amount of arrogance at that point. Maybe I still do, and I asked for an inordinate raise, and I was suggested that maybe I should go look elsewhere. And so I did, and ended up doing some work on some film effects for a Woody Allen film, of all things. You don't think of them as highly visual effects based, but ended up painting wires out of the air. The Goldie Hawn was flying in a scene while she was dancing, and did that for 3 or 4 months. Met some people working on that project. It was a woman that was from Japan, happened to know about some colleagues of her in Japan that were trying to start a television channel, which was essentially, it's called Mondo 21. It was kind of the MTV equivalent in Japan. They wanted to have some animation done at the beginning of the movie. And she said, "Hey, Jeff, these people want to come over. Do you think you'd be interested in it?" So I sort of spun up a company that weekend, rented a space that I was sure that I could get out of if I needed to. And me and a couple of buddies made a makeshift office, entertained a few of these executives. We put together a whole pitch. And then next thing you know, I had an animation studio in New York when I was about 21. And slightly terrified. I didn't, that wasn't the career trajectory I was going to take, but stuck with it and just kind of kept evolving it into different things. I think that's kind of been maybe the arc of my career is, try something, it ends up sticking, or you pivot a little bit, you stick with it, and it turns into, next thing you know, it turns into a company. So, that one turned into maybe a 50-person shop, ended up selling it and moving on to the next thing. So yeah.
When was it that you got exposed for the first time to hardware? You said, you mentioned using Kukan, Fanucs robots. Yeah. These are industrial robots that are used to like pick and place or weld or do all this stuff. And I can imagine how you use that for animation. But when was it you're like, okay, we got to make the jump of quality and go and automate some of the animation? Explain me that.
Yeah. So, I watched, I grew up with the original Star Wars, and I remembered that, there used to be a lot of documentaries on this. There was a motion control rig that was used to shoot a lot of the principal photography for Star Wars, but specifically the scene where Luke Skywalker is blowing up the Death Star, and he's going through the trench. And that was all computer controlled camera work. And that was done on a system. It was actually done in Marin, which is about half an hour from me here. Those were bespoke machines that were $1 million, robots essentially with cameras on them. And it was about 2008. The economy had crashed in America, and I was shopping on eBay, and I realized you could buy these industrial welding robots for pennies on the dollar. That being like $10,000, but these are systems that should have been $80,000, $90,000. And said, "Oh, let's get one." And so I bought one off of eBay, and it showed up on a giant truck, and then we had to kind of figure out if it was useful for anything. But the thesis was, well, why can't I use a
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
welding robot? I've seen these videos of these things. They're incredibly fast. They're incredibly precise. Why don't we put a camera on that and see if we can do the same thing that these guys did, 25 years ago, Star Wars at that point. And, I don't know, 3 or 4 days later, I think we're all looking at each other like, holy, expletive. This thing's incredible. We're onto something here. And so we bought 2 more. And then we had a robotics company all of a sudden. So that's kind of how we got into the large hardware. I would say that prior to that, I took a couple of years off in my career, and I ended up spending a whole lot of time playing with remote control airplanes. And that led, once you get bored with remote control airplanes, you get into remote control helicopters because the stakes are so much higher. They're more expensive, and when they fail tragically. And so I got into remote control helicopters, and then I'm looking at these helicopters, and they've got all these beautiful CNC parts, the computer numeric control, like milled little things, and these complex mechanisms. And so I was looking at them, I'm like, I should figure out how to make these things. So I bought a small CNC, and I had it in my garage so I could make parts, because why spend $200 on a part if you can make it yourself? And by the way, the answer to that is you can make it by yourself. It's going to take you 3 weeks. And so you spent, far more than the cost of those goods, but you learn along the way. And so, I learned how to do CNC machining. I learned how to program, though this really is a hobby. And this is something that, it's kind of a repeating pattern for me. I'll find something I'm interested in and I'll turn it into a business. But I took that CNC machine, which is moving, kind of micron level increments and with a drill on it. I said, why can't I put a camera on this and then, computer control that camera? So I'll move it a little bit, shoot, move it a little bit, shoot, essentially doing stop motion. And I built a little robot that we called Maxine. And it was a little CNC with a SLR camera on it. And it turned out to be really, really good at shooting products, things like cell phones for commercials, or shot a lot of food with it. But it essentially could do what they were doing in Star Wars with this little CNC machine and an SLR. So people found out about it, and then I was shooting 7 days a week with this system. A company came out of that when it turned out that these large robots were available on the secondary market. I saw them and I'm like, let's upgrade this thing and go there. So it's kind of interesting. So I went from a CNC that could fit on a desktop to a 3,000 pound welding robot, like in one move. And it, something that could lift 200 kilograms and, really dangerous actually, but, quite a big delta there. So, that's kind of the journey into robotics. 2008 was when that happened. We shot a couple commercials with the robots, and then we ended up, Warner Brothers saw an article about our studio at that point in Wired magazine, and called us to see if we could help out with this movie they were making called Gravity. So we did a little test, and kind of the rest is history. They decided that was the only way they could film the movie.
The interesting part for me is that you just realized there was a better way to, Star Wars was older, but that couldn't have been done out of a hobby. And then at that point, 2008, that's where you turn into a reality. And I think if I now look at what Formant does, and I kind of can see some of the inspiration and in the sense of like, hey, do we understand how to coordinate motion, to coordinate things? But we'll get to that. But before that, I really wanted to ask you, so you started off being an animator or, working animation, and then you understood, hey, I can be the best at shooting with precise control motion. And then at some point, you get an acquisition offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How'd that go? What's that experience like? What's the experience of being acquired by Google? Like, how does live this? And by the way, I really want to know also the bad sides of it, if you have any, because it's been a while ago. But in general, you started from owning the business. Now you were owning the problem at Google, right? Not owning the business anymore. How was that transition too?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I think I will be cautious to some extent here. I think it's how did that happen? That happened very quick. Google was a customer of mine. We would shoot videos for them, and so we were known inside of Google as people that had this kind of crazy technology, these robots. But we're also just doing traditional design work for them and traditional kind of 360 advertising, print, television commercials, and some specialized cinematography, really for the Android phones that were coming out at that point. We did a lot of shooting of them. So they knew us. And, let's see, we sort of, it all happened very quick. We were about to take a strategic investment from one of the companies that I really appreciate the most, Autodesk. And Autodesk had a research lab that doing a bunch of robotics work. I've used, Autodesk is known mostly for AutoCAD and now Fusion 360 and things like that, and a lot of tools in the construction world, in the architecture world. But I always knew them as the makers of Maya, which is the 3D animation software that was used to do sort of like Jurassic Park, and then everything since then. They've had a tremendous amount of market share, but I've used their software for years, and we were actually controlling our robots. One of our big innovations was we hooked up our robots to Maya so that as an animator, I could work with a robot instead of being a program. Like if you watch welding robots over the last 30 years, they move like welding robots, and they're very quick, very precise, and they move in lines because it's more efficient. Wanted to think like an animator for two reasons. One, you can do more beautiful motion if you put them on a path instead of directing them to coordinates. And secondly, you can get, the job of an animator is to get a lot done in as little amount of time as possible, especially if there's a Hollywood actor sitting there in front of you that's getting paid $1 bazillion an hour. So it was a quicker way to get something done with robots and in a more beautiful way. So anyways, we would take Maya software and we would apply it to robots. And so that was kind of the giant hack that we did. And, I'm kind of digressing a little bit about that, but it's part of the journey. And so we were looking at a investment from Autodesk, which like I said, I love that company. And just as we were about to close a strategic investment, I ran into a colleague at Google, and he said to me, hey, let's have a conversation about how we can work closer together, which, it was sort of coded, I guess. And I sort of, what's going on here? And I said, well, okay, yeah, you should know that we're just about to close this investment. He says, okay, be over tomorrow. And so he came to the studio the next day. And then a day after that, Larry Page was there, founder of Google, and looking at these robots, asking all sorts of interesting questions about them. And then we were very, very quickly in due diligence. So we sort of wasn't a very traditional merger and acquisition situation. It was very spontaneous, very, very quick. We shut down the other conversations, and we were kind of, then in diligence and making things happen, which was, for founders out there, when large companies go into this motion, you should be aware that you don't know this the first time you do it. But diligence is an entire process, and quite time consuming, and it takes a lot of your resources. And by the end of it, you're not quite sure what you've been through. But it's interesting to say the least. So yeah, that's kind of how it went down.
And so you jumped on board. So not only the company was acquired, you went on to work at Google X or Moonshot Factory, whatever what was I don't know what the denomination was at the time. I'm intimately familiar with Project Loon, which is one of the projects that was there. I met kind of the CTO of that project, Sal Candido, insane technologist, and a lot of the people around that project for something completely different. What I do know about that group, it's the group that sometimes projects work, sometimes they don't work, but they just group a lot of the most insane talent in one specific vertical, and they just try to do something that hasn't been done before. So what is it that were you doing at Google? How did you like that experience?
Yes, it's tough for me because, a couple of reasons. So I'm a startup guy. So I've had, by the time that I'd gotten to Google, I didn't really kind of get into the myriad offshoots of my companies and things like that, but I'd already had about 10 companies, by the time that we were acquired, in various things that I was doing. And so I loved the early stage. I like the 0 to 1. I like the first 5 employees. I like the phase shift that happens when you get about 30 people and you spend half of your time walking around the block trying to convince people that something's not as terrible as they think it is, or that you're not as crazy as they think you are. And so, all of the kind of interpersonal connections that happen in a small company, and all of the amplitudes that are I think I've very much started to love. And I think so for me to go from what we were about 100 people when we were acquired, and then to end up at a company that is 50,000 people at the time, which is far smaller than it is now, was dramatic shock. And so I was excited about it, but I didn't really know what I was signing up for. At that point, when you end up in that sort of a situation, it's the complete opposite of the founder mentality, where at a 50-person company, I can make a very quick decision, and I can execute that decision through the organization because I have the ultimate authority to do so, and I sign the check. That is obviously not the case at a large publicly traded company. So you spend a tremendous amount of your time building consensus and convincing people that your ideas are valid, and playing the I don't want to say the game, but managing the ecosystem versus thinking and doing. And I'm very much I think and I do, and I learn while I'm doing it. And that doesn't work at large companies. There are exceptions to that, but you have to really protect your environment from the bureaucracy to do so. So that was kind of my experience, was getting less done than I would have liked for a long time. I think you can do it, but you have to be a certain type of person, and it's very much the way I think you can succeed in that environment as an executive. And a lot of the people that do progress companies like that are people that come in through acquisitions that have strong opinions and don't tolerate the organization getting in their way. I didn't have that perspective. When we were acquired, there were 8 other companies acquired at the same time. So you can imagine that in the robotics space. And so there was a bit of mayhem. There was a lot of organizations being integrated, and a lot of egos to contend with when you've got 8 CEOs at the table. And so I sort of, if I look back at it, I think I attempted to play a role of moderator and looking across the aisle and, consensus building and things like that. And I think it potentially, inhibited me from being as effective as I could have been. So, it didn't work out because I miss, the drug of the startup. But also, I don't think I was particularly, I guess the classic line is, do it and beg for forgiveness later. I didn't have that mentality. And I think that's what you need to have inside of a large organization, to be impactful. And so, to some extent, I regret, not having sharper elbows or being more strong in my convictions over there, because you have a tremendous opportunity because of the war chest. So if you're onto something, you can actually do it, but you've got to be very loud about it, I think.
Lower force, longer lever, as opposed to the opposite. I think I get the concept.
Yeah.
And so interestingly enough, I think you were bound to end up somewhere again, where you had been about 10 times, as you mentioned. And so what was the nexus story of Formant? How does one start? What do you guys even do?
What do we do? Well, I'll tell you what we do now. Yeah, what we do. We do what we set out to do. So we connect humans and robots. And what does that mean? It's kind of what I've always done. Sort of, if I look at what we did even in the film industry, we were essentially connecting a director of photography with a machine that they have no business using. And you do that through software. And so, now I look at what do we do? It's at a completely different scale and completely different industry. But we allow human beings to manage robots that are under their command. And so, people think about humanoid robots and robot armies or whatever, drones. We don't do that kind of thing. We certainly work with every type of robot that's out there, but we are working with industry, and we're working with businesses that have, between 10, 50 to 20,000 robots that are under their command. They don't look like, C-3PO. They look like floor scrubbers and farming equipment and robots that are vacuuming streets, robots that are sanding dry. So you name it. We're working with somebody in just about every industry that is using automation. And so we allow you to monitor those robots that are out there in the field or on the campus or in the warehouse, get all their data signals and store all of that information, allow humans to be alerted when there's an event that they need to take care of, or there's something that they need to manage. So we're an interface between humans and robots so that people can have effective automation. One of the things that I don't think people necessarily realize if you're not in the industry is that there's not a robot out there that's doing a job that's of any consequence that isn't being watched by a human, because these things fail. It's not because people don't want full autonomy. Of course, everybody does. However, there might be a safety reason, or more often than not, it's the reality that things happen. There's ambiguity in the world, and there's situations that need to be navigated. So just about every robot is phoning home in some regard to report an issue or to have resolution by a human.
So full autonomy is great, but full autonomy in the real world is almost asymptotic. So what Formant does, if I understand it correctly, is you're bridging to that asymptote by allowing humans to control. Do you do that control for yourself? How do customers interact with you, right? So at the beginning, when you were signing the first ones, what was your pitch? What can you do for them?
Well, I don't know. That was so long ago. We're 6 years into this, 6.5 years into this. So I don't remember the original pitch. I think at the beginning, it's actually, you're more listening than pitching. And so you're trying to understand the customer's problem. You have an intuition about what they need. And I had a lot of experience from Google. We looked at just about every application the robot could be applied to and realized that, so many of them are like at the 95% mark. They almost work. And so it was like, what if we could bridge that gap with a human? So, we started talking to robotic startups that were having challenges when they started to go from the laboratory out into the field. They were sending engineers out with every robot and this doesn't scale. So we said, hey, let's build some infrastructure that allows you to easily get signals off so that you can make appropriate decisions and you can do it remotely, and so on and so forth. So, I think we knew the problem space a little bit, and we knew that, wouldn't it be nice if you could tell without walking up to a robot what was going on to it? And you get a emphatic yes on that. Wouldn't it be nice if you can lower your ratio of engineers to robots to maintain them, and you get a yes. But then there's a lot of things that you don't understand that your customers inform you about. So, how do you want to review your data? How do you want to reinform the data set by having humans mark it up? What are you using for labeling? All these sorts of things. And you kind of, build on the core technology that you have and the product that you have. So it's kind of a two-way street at the beginning. I think now we're recognized as the industry leader, and I think we are in a position to inform the industry on best practices because we have broad exposure to all these people doing all these different things. And so we see the Venn diagram of the overlap and, how do you want to deal with alerting? How do you want to deal with data management? How do you want to deal with operation of the robot? And what is your point of view on analytics? We have pretty strong position on that now. We're obviously on enterprise engagement specifically, continually being asked to adopt or adapt, but it's usually kind of adapting to somebody's infrastructure needs or their security requirements or things like that. So it's still an evolution. We're never going to stop evolving, but I think we're far more solid in our knowledge, and oftentimes we're informing the customer at this point.
And so what I'm curious about, and I think something that we double click on very often at BitBuilders, are business models, and how do business models basically interlock with the market dynamics, the market needs. And to me, thinking about this, what I see is a market that needs an outcome, which is basically the operation. But I also need some tools to basically handle themselves, the customers, some of the failures, some of the data gathering, some of the detailed operation. So how did you construct the business model? How did that evolve? I'm sure that evolved together with the company. What's your thesis and thoughts on that?
Yeah. So it's like, it's organic, and I think it has to be. And this is an early market still. Robotics has been around for 40 years, but in earnest and very seriously in the last 20. But that's still, the adoption rates are relatively low outside of traditional manufacturing, and so it's a bit greenfield, and people don't know what the right model is yet. It's also not at hyperscale like the server business or something like that, or so there's not a tried and true answer at this point. So I think you need to continually adjusting it based on what we see out there. But you can think of us as a SaaS company, and so it's subscription based, and so you pay monthly, and then you pay by endpoint. There are other people that are looking at per seat licenses. It didn't seem intuitive to us to do it that way. It's also, a fact that there aren't a tremendous amount of operators at robotics companies. They're a relatively small group of people. So it seems, clearer to tie the business model to the high value asset, which is the machine out there doing the work. And so, we're based on how many robots you have deployed, and then there's breaks for bucket sizes. So that's the model. It's traditional SaaS, and so far so good.
What is the biggest point of friction for a customer that wants to adopt a solution like Formant? What is it that they have to do? What is it that you guys are helping them doing to implement faster, integrate faster?
Yeah, it's actually, I thought when we started this, that we would have a tremendous amount of friction and that all of these systems are different. So when we, it's like, well, and I think investors are always asking this question of us. And I don't want to say it ironically, it's surprisingly, we realized kind of very quickly that wasn't the issue. There's going to be a Linux computer somewhere in the chain, and it's going to likely be connected to the internet. So you kind of got a place that you can install an agent. So, generally that's something like a Jetson or something from NVIDIA running on the robot. It's got Linux, and you can, you've got the opportunity to there install a piece of software that essentially doing some buffering on the robot and then transmitting that data and allowing command and control from a remote situation. So there's a hardware bridge essentially that is common to 95% of the robots out there. And then there's also, I would say, 65% of our customers use ROS or ROS2, which is the robotic operating system. There's a messaging protocol that is common. So, there's enough commonality that wasn't the problem. Early on, it was build versus buy. Everybody had kind of a homebrew solution that they were doing. They'd been around before we were there. I think where the industry has matured, it's like you're not going to go build Datadog. It exists. So you're picking up. I think we're at that point now where you don't need to build all this infrastructure. You don't need to manage it. So you want to pick it up from somebody. So, I think, but originally you're talking to deep tech companies inherently, right? These are robotics companies. They're full of engineers. They don't want to, they prefer not to buy software. Why buy it when you can spend all day writing it? So I think, and so, that was originally the friction, but I would suggest that we've kind of overcome that at this point. The amount of money you would spend to build data infrastructure and get it right and understand, sort of best practices in terms of the usability of those interfaces and what's actually needed. You're going to spend way, way, way more than you are picking up something. And I actually think it's sort of, when I consider what the value proposition is these days, it's very much from an end user standpoint. It is, how many operators to how many robots do you need? So it's that ratio that is kind of the holy grail, or it's time to deployment out there in the field, or something like this. And so those are the business arguments. But I think about the value of the company. We have all sorts of technologies that I'm very proud of that we've built, but I dismiss the technologies that we have. They're all replaceable. Anybody can figure any of it out. It's the domain knowledge that we have. It's being there. It's working with all these companies and all these verticals, understanding the problems that is irreplaceable. And so I think that's kind of the strongest argument that we have is like, we understand how you want to work with these machines. We know the requirements. We know the field engineer wants. We know what CTO wants. We know what the analyst wants, and we provide the tooling for that. And also, maybe to back to your question around kind of friction, a lot of our customers actually are getting to a point where they don't have. Some of the people we work with make robots, but a lot of the people we work with, and especially as we continue to go up market and we work with bigger and bigger companies, they don't make robots. They buy robots from other vendors, and they want to integrate them all in one space and have them all play nice or have all the data, correlated. And so we make it really, really, really simple to bring on a new robot. And so what used to take, a month of integration work now is a day or two. And you've got another OEM's robot, on your platform. So you can pick your vendors. You're not bound to anybody else's, to any vendor software. And so as opposed to friction, people see us as like, wait, we know that strategically, we don't want to be tied to any manufacturer. We have to have that flexibility. So we need a neutral platform. And so they see us as a way to easily work with many types of robots from many people. So it's actually it's kind of an anti-friction argument, I suppose. Dead simple to get a robot up in days. It's not like minutes yet, but we're getting there.
And it's interesting because the people that have never worked in robotics, neither have touched a microcontroller or anything like that, don't fully grasp the idea that basically to make a robot, or the computer that runs the robot, right, do something, need to code in a specific language, transmit that command in with a specific language through a specific channel, et cetera, et cetera. If you can actually level the playing field and make the fleet hardware agnostic, you can actually extract a lot more data, a lot more insight, a lot more coordination can spin out of that. And that's how you make robotic fleets. when you look at like the initial, you know, the initial days of robotics, you had companies that had to purchase different robots from different manufacturers, and they literally had a team per each robot to figure out how each robot should work. And then the team had to talk to each other to understand, hey, when you pass this package this way and the other robot grips it, we don't know really to understand what the other robot has done. But to have you need to have like all sorts of external checks to link that. That's what data infrastructure is like. So to that, I have an analogy. You were mentioning Autodesk before. The plethora of construction, and I'm talking not about Maya, but the rest of their offering, the plethora of construction software that exists today on the desktops of architects, engineers, it's completely fragmented. And we have, there's especially one company, it's called Speckle, but there's a bunch of them that are building data infrastructure to make that data readable and writable in any format, in and out, with different software vendors. And that's actually the same concept, is like you speak in different languages with different people in your team, you harmonizing this, and then it just becomes completely different to work with. So I'm curious to understand, where do you see Formant technology going? Because today, what you have a market that's extremely hungry for more and more robots. You were mentioning Jetson. There's many more development platforms that are coming out. Arduino Pro, all the new NVIDIA shiny stuff. There's a lot of interesting things. I even worked and played with Lego Mindstorm when I was in high school in the US, which I'm sure you know. So there's all sorts of controllers out there, etc. So the market is growing. Where is the data infrastructure going towards?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we're in the right spot. It's going to companies like Formant. So it's very much going away from OEMs. There's people are very concerned about where their data is going, and they're seeing it as a very high value, asset. So we help our customers collect all that information and leverage it. So I don't know beyond, what we're doing, where it goes in the future. I think I think the obvious answer is it's centralized in the cloud. We have multiple deployment strategies, so you can do everything from on-prem to public cloud. And so that's kind of at a customer's requirement. We will do different deployments. So, but beyond that, there's not really another solution. I don't know what would happen. It's beyond being collated in one place. But I think what's happening is people are starting to gather the information from multiple systems. They're starting to normalize it so they can get reporting that is intelligible. And you can compare and contrast performance of different types of systems, but you can also coordinate between them. For example, some of the things that you're talking about, where one robot needs to deal with another robot, and two robots meet in an aisle at a Walmart. Like, what do you do? That's like to some extent a solved problem, but largely you'd be surprised how unsolved that is, and that the intercommunication protocols are not standardized yet. There's a couple standards out there, but they're immature, and they're not widely adopted. So there'll be standardization, things like that. But maybe more interesting is we're going to kind of skip over a lot of that. And so now that you've got all the data in a spot, and you can contextualize that data, and you can tell a system like ours, why do I care about this? What is a mission? What is a route? What is a error? Which ones matter? Which ones don't? If you can start to feed that information into metadata, essentially, that you're collecting, then an intelligent agent can help you do your coordination. And so where the world has been things like SLAM, which is a navigation technology, or, traffic management. How do two robots navigate around? Who gets priority in a delivery system, something like that? That is going to very quickly not be the conversation. That's the domain of roboticists, and that's the thinking of roboticists. But now with artificial intelligence and advanced agents, you can reason over large data sets that are contextualized, and you can make intelligent choices, or you can recommend to a human being, here is the course of action that we'd recommend. Do you agree or not? And so you're going to start to see that. And so I think a lot of the traditional work in robotics where, get the data and then engineer a solution based on rules is going to go away. And what's going to become far more interesting and important is that you catalog and contextualize the data in a way that says, here's my intent. Here's what the robot is trying to do. Here's where it's succeeding. Here's where it's failing. Help me out because I've got 20,000 of these things and I need to know, what do I do? And so you're going to start to have a layer of artificial intelligence on top of this that is making, a superset of recommendations to human beings. And so I think that's, where it's going, and it's not going there in 10 years, it's going there now. And so the fundamental of that is collect all the data, make sure you're connected to the machines, make sure that connection is secure, make sure it's bulletproof, and make sure you're gathering highly contextualized information.
So what you're saying in a nutshell is collect data, create an ontology, a context, encode intent, and then let the user act on that intent.
Yep, that's exactly right.
That's
where it's going.
Where are you spending most of your time right now? I'm very curious.
Spending most of my time sitting in front of a Zoom station, talking to my remote company. We're all remote, so I spend my entire day sitting, unfortunately, in a chair, staring at a rectangle, speaking to human beings through an artificial interface. But beyond that, I don't think that was the question. I spend. Let's see. That's a great question. I don't know. I'm a builder, and so I don't want to answer the question because I don't want to hear myself say the answer. But I probably spend 25% of my time on innovation currently, which I am extremely excited about. And then the delta is split between fundraising, because it's my primary responsibility as a CEO of a venture-backed company. And then, management and of what we're building and customer relations. So, I'm not doing, I get involved on large accounts on the sales side. I really, it's important for me that I continue to be abreast of what the actual problems are. So spend much time with customers, and then, working on the company, trying to transform it all the time. And then, a tremendous amount of time on fundraising. And that's kind of it's new. This is actually, I've had a lot of companies, and this is the first venture-backed company I've had. So I have not had that experience, but I have now, and 6.5, 7 years into this. And so very familiar with what it means to fundraise. But it's difficult because it is, antithetical to building. It's you want to spend your day creating and solving problems, but then you're this is the reality of the fundraising that is the responsibility of the CEO.
There's a huge, waterfall of conversations that we might have on like the difference between building a business in the traditional way, building a business with capital that you can burn, and also what that means basically. What you can achieve with one, what you can't achieve with the other. But then on one side, but then on the other side, where does the leadership spend time, and are investors' interests always aligned with the builder's interest? That's really not a trivial thing to understand.
Well, it's important. Yeah, it's actually the kind of thing that I don't know. It's sort of I'm not. I like I said, I learned by doing, and I'm a extremely different point of view on this than I did, when I started the company. And so I think you learn that along the way, and everything you just mentioned, those are the real concerns, and there's materiality to all of it. And I think that, core to that is making sure that your investors and your interests are aligned. That's how you win. And you can leverage them. Otherwise you have a problem. We've been fortunate, and we have a tremendous group of investors. I don't do particularly well with adult supervision. I think that's why I'm not at a large company, but I do have obviously a board. The board continues to get larger and larger, but I actually love my board, and they're on our team, and that's not always the case. And I think it goes really south when that's not the case.
Has it been important for you to have not only an aligned, but like I hope you've had the experience of having an investor in your board that's actually truly helping with issues at hand, stuff that's stuff that was burning, that was really pressing, that they've had experience with in the past, or simply have been able to help. Did you get that? Obviously, you have to say yes because you're a venture-backed company, but
Yes,
of course. But truly, that's any thoughts?
yeah. I think there's you need to filter, right? There's a lot of opinions, and so I think we're unique to some extent in that we work in robotics. Not a lot of people do. And so there's not outside of the industrial players, there's not a tremendous amount of industry expertise that you're going to find on a board. And, we do have some folks certainly that are very experienced in the manufacturing space. BMW, for example, is an investor in the company. And so obviously they've got a ton of robotics experience. It's just not necessarily, most of our robots are field deployed. They're not welding cars. And so they can't bring that specific knowledge to us. And the other investors, they work in, their portfolios are generally light on robotics. There's not a whole lot of investors that lean in hard to robotics in the portfolio. So I'm not sure that there's a tremendous amount of domain knowledge to garner from investors. It's more understanding the financial markets from my perspective, and understanding the investment temperature, sentiment, and what the disposition of that market is, has been incredibly informative to me. And so, I think all the time, of how to position the company based on, the needs of the company. One of those needs is fuel, which is so that's been super, the board's been super informative in that regard.
I want to move towards the end. I promised you a short and crispy conversation, but I'd go on for hours. But the one thing that I'd ask you before my usual final question is, what do you guys? I know it's a broad question, but I'm sure you have a framework. Who are you looking for when you build a team for Formant? I'm sure that's another piece of the puzzle that 100% of your time, it's somewhere in there. You said you're remote. Are you remote worldwide? Do you only hire in the US? And also, what do you guys think is key when being an employee of Formant? What do you think differentiates your team from the rest?
Yeah, I think so. We are worldwide, but we are the lion's share is U.S. based team members, and I think we're in by 30 states or something. Last I checked, but we have employees in Europe, we have employees in Japan, and so we're kind of everywhere. We've got a whole team in Armenia as well. So there, to some extent, there's strategic reasons to do this. Obviously, there's cost basis is consideration, but also, one of our bigger concerns is DevOps and uptime, and making sure that we've got coverage 24 hours a day when people are depending on the platform. So that, dictates a certain geography. But, for me personally, I've always had companies that have thrived when I have a lot of big deltas in skill sets. And so, at Bot and Dolly, prior to Formant, prior to my Google experience, we would hire engineers, but they would be sitting next to architects, which arguably are engineers, but then they'd be sitting next to a storyboard artist, sitting next to a line producer, sitting next to a writer. And you put those people in the room and you sprinkle enough technology around and magic happens. And so I really, really like interdisciplinary teams. This company, due to its hardcore engineering and very like cloud-based technology, has been let's say 70-80% software engineers, and the differences there are front end, back end, or full stack, or DevOps, QA, things like this. And so it's been pretty traditional. I think I get asked a lot about how to build a team. We've been fortunate in that we've had really just a great crew forever, and I think I have this philosophy that if you start with a few good people, it sort of spreads out that way. You inherently, people that get through are passing some kind of a bar that is not necessarily articulable, but it's something that the bad eggs don't get through, or the people that don't agree with the company culture just kind of it's not a fit for you or fit for them. So we have a tremendous a group of human beings that are dedicated and that we care about and care about each other. And that's been my experience in my career the whole time. And it's super important to me. I mean, we've all got a choice. We don't all have a choice, but I'm fortunate enough to have a choice. And I think the people that work for me are fortunate enough to have a choice of where they work. And so if you spend all your time, a lot of your time at your job, make sure it's something you enjoy and make sure it's with people you enjoy. And I think there's just, I don't want to get too philosophical or something, but I think there's something where it's like, build it, they will come, or something like that about it, where these people attract like-minded people. So there's not a science to it. It's just more of something that I think inherently happens. So it's been my experience. As we move forward, I am actually starting to think about this quite a bit right now, because work is transforming radically, and companies are going to transform radically, and we're transforming radically. And so I think what's most important right now is that you're malleable, that you understand the latest tools. Those tools are all AI powered, and that you're a problem solver. And so it's a little bit of a cliche thing to say, but I think it's like anyone, you need to be a domain expert to some extent in this industry, or have some expertise, but you need to be a little bit of a polymath, in that you have part of your brain is you're a great communicator. Part of your brain is you're a great engineer. But a great engineer doesn't mean somebody that writes Go or writes Python amazing or C++. It means somebody that solves problems from a programmatic standpoint. And so you've got to be great at that. So the interview questions are all going to change. It's not going to be a coding test. It's going to be like, here's a problem. How would you go about unpacking that, solving it? Like, that is so relevant right now. But you've also, you've got to be able to maybe bleed into another department, because, you can't with the tooling that's out there now, especially in the development world, with what we're seeing in AI. You've got to be able to think a little bit like a product manager if you're an engineer. And product managers need to think a little bit like an engineer, because they can actually write code now. And so these lines are getting very blurry. And so when I step back, what does that mean? It means you've got to be able to solve problems, and be able to articulate those problems to something that you're likely chatting. So this is new thinking. This will be, somebody hears this podcast in 6 months, it's going to sound like oh my God, that's so, early 2025. Of course we're talking with our systems now, but that's what we're seeing. And so it's like, it's actually changing. Like, who do we really think we need? We need people who can solve problems, have enough domain expertise, and are excellent communicators.
Tools slowly blend in and kind of like start to coalesce in a single layer of knowledge that you can access. It's all about, can you actually use that tool, bounce an idea against that tool, get a solution, and get your team to work on it? Can you communicate to your team? Can you make that task into an effort, and then kind of like truly make that effort team thing? I think it's gonna be much more important, because you're right. I think 10 years ago, the highest paid engineer, or like, if the market, a perfect market, whatever economics 101 assumption you want to take, in a perfect market, the highest paid engineer was the one that was writing the most amount of lines of code in the fastest time with the lowest error rate. It's probably not going to be in 2026 the same person, in 2025 the same person. I love that you're taking that on. Of course you are, given that you are the forefront. And to that question that it's unrelated, but still related to an extent, what is your advice, which by the way, I want to close with, what is your advice for a young founder that it's building something hard? Because it's building in an industry that it's hard to crack. It's building a solution that it's hard to make. And it's building a team that it's, hard to put together for the, aforementioned two reasons. What's your advice?
Yeah, so I had this conversation with a guy in New York that I worked with when I was 22 or so, and maybe right before I started my first company, and I met this guy, and I hooked up with him. He wanted some career advice or something a couple of years ago, and he said this thing that I actually really appreciated and was flattering. So of course I appreciated it. But he said, Jeff, you always pick something really hard and you don't stop. And so I thought about that, and I think there's a truth to it. I mean, a lot of people give up pretty early, and I think that so maybe the message here is like tenacity matters. If that's the way you're wired. And so I heard an anecdote. 10% of venture-backed companies succeed, and an investor told me once, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'll kind of it is, and I've adopted it, and it aligns with my thesis, so I'm sticking with it. But the investor told me, he says, Jeff, the reality is, it's not that 10% of the companies aren't onto something brilliant or don't have product market fit, or there's some existential problem with the company. The majority of companies that fail are because the founder moves on and does something else. And so, I thought about that a little bit, and I think there might be some truth to that. So I think that there's what I'd suggest is, commitment matters, tenacity matters. I think you've got to also, fear needs to go away. You need to take the shot. If you're thinking about it, just do it. You're going to learn, you're going to grow from it. Like, it's not that big of a deal to try something. You'll succeed or you'll fail, but at the end, you're gonna be more equipped on the other side of that failure. So I highly encourage people that are inclined to start a company to do it. Actually, don't overthink it. Just get in there. You don't know what you don't know. Just go do it. But when you pick that thing, understand what you're walking into. It's not going to be what you think it is. It's not going to be as easy as you think it is. It's not going to have the, likely won't have the J curve that you anticipate happening, 1.5 years in. You might have to wait 3, you might have to wait 10, who knows? But make sure it's something you care about enough, that you're willing to stick it out, because it's going to be, it's going to be challenging. It's going to be awesome. But think about, is this something that I could do for 5 years? Is this something I could do for 10 years? Because there's a really good chance that that's going to happen. And if the answer is yes, and you're committed to it, and you don't stop, you're probably going to succeed at it. That's my, at least I'm going with that anyways.
Awesome. I think it's a fit. As an answer to this question. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on BitBuilders with me. I hope we can do a part 2 soon. I'll be watching closely just as much as I did before your work and what you guys are doing at Formant. I think is an example for the industry. I think it's a testament to the industry that's moving forward. I think in a lot of fields, when they start maturing, you start finding those common threads across the field that will basically grow into huge value captures. But at the same time, they will signal that the industry is ready. So keep up with that amazing good work. I'll be watching from the sidelines and very happy to chat anytime for a part 2.
Yeah, would love to. It's really been a pleasure. Maybe I'll catch you soon.
Awesome. Have a good one.